We are now live for the final Wild Service Book Club, and I'm hoping people are joining and have continued to join. So I'm going to be hosting tonight for our final book club in the series. My name is Lewis Winks, and I am joined here tonight by Emma Linford, who is the author of our chapter of in Wild Service on education, and Max Girardeau, who I will introduce in a moment, but is our guest also here tonight. Now, I'm going to introduce our guests, and then I'll just give I'll have a few questions to ask you guys, and then I'll just let you flow on from there. We have some time for some audience questions as well. So if you've got questions, put them in the chat. And we've got Amy Jane Beer, who's also with us, who's going to be harvesting those questions and will be giving them back to us to ask to our guests tonight. So thanks everybody for joining. This book has been out for well over a year now, so this must be one of the longest ever running book clubs. And if you've not read it, then there's really no excuse, because you've had over a year to read it. And but don't fear, if you've not read it and if you haven't done your homework, then Emma is going to be giving a summary of her chapter. So don't worry if you are joining us and you've not read that. So Emma Linford is a campaigner and an expedition guide and outdoor educator who spent 20 years facilitating transformative expeditions for over 5,000 humans from diverse social backgrounds on multi-day journeys globally. She is also an organiser and a spokesperson for the Stars Are For Everyone, and that's how Emma and I know each other principally. And she lectures at Schumacher College down here in Devon, which is where I'm based. And she's a international mountain leader and Royal Geographical Society fellow. So it's really great to have you here with us, Emma, to talk about your chapter, amongst other things, and to delve into education as you see it. And we've also got Max Girardeau, who is an ecosystemic educator, facilitator, and social entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of the Visionaries Collective and practitioner who is reimagining education and youth infrastructures as spaces for collaborative liberation, ecological stewardship, and social regeneration. And his work draws on ecotherapy, trauma-informed practice, rites of passage, systems thinking, and centers on ideas of relational inquiry. So, Max, it's really great to have you here. We know each other, I think, through Rewilding Education, the collective of like-minded people who are seeking to challenge the way we see education. And it's really great to have you here. Thank you for being here to talk to this topic. Now, I'm just going to kick us off by I've given a little kind of summary of your very extensive bios, and I always feel like that's like a very shallow way to begin, and particularly given that you've obviously had lots more life experiences than those. So I'm going to hand over to you guys to just, Emma, you talk about in your chapter in Wild Service, you talk about education being more than this straight line, this kind of way of getting from A to B, but actually more of a sort of meandering, zigzagging journey, which takes us through life as we pick up our experiences and knowledges along the way. You say it much more poetically in your chapter, of course. But I'm going to put that back to you. And Emma, can you tell me, and we'll get Max, I'm going to ask you to do this as well, so you can be preparing in the background. Can you just tell me something about the zigs and zags that have brought you to this point, please?
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. Hello, everyone. Really good to be here. Yeah, zigzagging. Yeah, okay. And I'll explain that in a little bit, probably in the next question, where I open up what my chapter is, the overview of that. But my zigzagging journey, probably surprisingly to you all, knowing where I am right now, trying to deconstruct the way we're living and form better relationships with nature, is I started coming from curriculum education into design and advertising, right? So design and advertising, like that beating heart of consumerism. And for me, that's like so poles apart. That's the influence that I'm trying to get away from, the influence that's so strong, right? Consumerism. So anyway, I started there, but and I also had a very competitive performance background in sport as well. I think that's quite relevant to say. So yeah, I started there. And then what happened is an expedition took my eye. I think I was discontent in working in London and working towards ridiculous, futile design goals and briefs. And I went off to Belize and did a 3-month project with Rally International. And so I was one of 100 venturers, and we did 3 months, 1 month in different locations, whether it was living in a jungle, whether it was helping a community build a school, or living on a key or a desert island, so to speak. And just summarizing that, it gave me my eyes open to a different culture, another way of living, another way of being that was different to the society I came from. And I went back and I was like, okay, so what am I going to do now? And suddenly everything I'd learned didn't fit back into society, and I needed to earn money. I was like, okay, well, I'll go on the dole just so I can buy some time to find out how I'm going to earn some more capital to continue on this straight line that I'm going to talk about soon. And I was like, so I actually did. I went back into design because it was so difficult to change at that point. And then I carried on, but in my head I was like, okay, but my experience has told me there's other ways of being, and that experience has changed me completely. Perhaps I can enable change for other people. So it was until, you know, actually another 6 years later when I went, that's enough. Okay, I'm going to be an expedition leader. I'm going to enable change for other people, human-centric change. And I'll say the words, using the outdoors to change ourselves internally, relationally, so how we can relate better to ourselves and other people. As kind of human-centric transformation. So yeah, I went into that for the next 20 years and worked all over the world, did kind of hardcore stuff, extreme stuff in the Arctic Pole, scientific research. You know, that's kind of real survival type expeditions. But I also did work with marginalized people or young criminals, for example, Chance for Change journeys up in Scotland, 10 or 20 days, where they learn how to journey from place to place and learn self-agency and confidence along the way. So I've kind of traversed a lot of different spheres in the outdoors, and that's what happens. One door opens, one door opens, one door opens. And that includes therapy, that includes working with young kids, that includes leadership. It kind of goes on, so I'm going to stop it there. But what irked me, I suppose, was, there's something missing. Okay, I'm enabling transformation in people, but they're going back and they've still got problems. There's still mental distress. There's problems. What's missing? And it set me on an inquiry. And then I failed my International Mountain Leader environmental section of that award out in the Alps. I was like, I've been in the outdoors for 15 years. How can I fail the environmental section? And that was a big cause. Like, if I'm failing it, then it's not being taught properly. It's not in that system. Why isn't it in that system? Okay. And then COVID came. And then I went to Schumacher, which blew my mind and body into smithereens. And this journey now is about putting all that back together, because it also taught me other ways of being that weren't the ways of being on expedition, which is pushing, surviving, summiting. It was like a more wholesome return to body, and the softness and the vulnerabilities and the compassion and all the wholeness of our bodies. So I was like, okay, what should I do now? Okay. But it also taught me all of that is within nature, and we are nature. So how can I change that relationship that we've got at the moment to one with nature? And this is where I am. And this is how I met Lewis, with some land access, because there was lots of land injustice. And this is how I come to write my chapter. The end.
Thanks, Em. That's great. What a journey. And from design all the way through it. And but I should say, actually, if you've ever seen the amazing Stars of Everyone banner, which has been out there, that's Emma's work. So you know, you've integrated your roots in design all the way through into transforming our relationship with.
It's
still going. Yeah, it's still going. Yeah.
Great.
That's really great. Thank you so much. And isn't that better than just reading out a bio from a page? But I really appreciate that, and going with you with all those zigs and zags. Max, can I hand over to you, and just to tell us about your meandering journey to this point?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for the invite to be here, and it's a real privilege. Just want to situate a little bit where I'm dialing in from, which is in the Hope Valley in the Peak District, on a piece of land that has been stewarded by many hands, young and old. And there's a very beautiful, mature copper beech tree outside the window, and yeah, I guess leading me to this space that I'm in physically, but also to this call, was a long lifetime inquiry into our relationship with the environment and place and community. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give you my whole life story, obviously, but I guess there's been some moments in terms of the zigzagging journey that have kind of steered me as on my journey. And I guess even from my time in education, when I was the first hook for me was when I was at Nottingham University, and I started going into secondary schools, kind of promoting languages. I was studying French and philosophy, and went into local secondary schools promoting French and studying languages at further education. And I remember they shared a stat with me around how, you know, GCSEs are designed so that a third of the cohort, because they're cohort assessed, a third are designed to fail and get below C grades at that time. It just was, you know, kind of bonkers to me that we designed the system that by design fails certain young people. So I think that was the first time I really started to think, okay, what is the system that we're all being forced through in many ways, because it's not very consent based, which is a whole other line of inquiry I'm sure we'll get onto. And yeah, coming out of that whole system, I felt pretty lost, if I'm honest. As I was supposedly adult, but I didn't particularly know what that meant or how to do it in a wise way. And so, but I found my way to kind of working with young people through the National Citizen Service, which I guess, given the topic of wild service, feels quite a yeah, you know, I think without realizing it was my first foray into rites of passage work, and this work of trying to prepare young people for the world, and just working with young people outside of the school environment, taking them outside of their everyday context, and cutting my teeth as a youth worker, and yeah, and that just really kind of lit something up in me around, you know, experiential learning and working with young people in context, in place, in relationship to projects that we're working on and places that we're visiting or participating in. I think that, combined with a whole lifetime of being dragged on youth hostel holidays by my family, and having a granddad that was an avid rambler, and yeah, has kind of walked all of the kind of footpaths in the UK many times over, and yeah, ultimately I was given a lot of freedoms and kind of trust as a child to go out and explore, and had the privileges to do so. But it was after doing this program that was called the Year Here Fellowship that I set up this Visionaries collective with a group of other educators who were all, I guess, very frustrated at how the narratives and the paradigm and the water that the young people were swimming in was not really in keeping with what we were feeling and sensing, and what they were feeling and sensing was really needed. And so, yeah, inspired by our experiences of working with young people in more liberating and more relational ways, set up the Visionaries as an inquiry into how we do more of that work in education, in mainstream, but also in community and alternative and informal settings. That work has just initiated me again and again into deeper lines of thinking and inquiry around where do we look for, like, who is the teacher, who is the student, where's the learning happening, how do we let go of our plans and kind of work in more emergent and participatory ways, and ultimately looking to nature as a teacher. I think that was being introduced to going out and spending time solo on the land as a practice was also something that I've been jumping around, running around, cycling around, being quite an adrenaline junkie growing up, and then it was only really in my early 20s that I was introduced to actually what is it to just be in stillness and be in reverence of nature, and how do we, what happens when we really pay attention and slow down. And there was one particularly paradigm shifting moment of doing a 24 hours of solo time on the land, fasting, and just having the time to watch a stag beetle do its thing for about an hour and a half. And I'm sure I probably did this as a really young child, but never as an adult have I given myself the time or the space to actually just be in that beetle's world, or in another being's world, to that depth of attention and awareness. And just completely changed my whole kind of perception of identity of myself and how I'm in relationship with the world. So lots of these different experiences, being part of amazing networks like Rewilding Education, where I met you, Lewis, and just like being connected to so many different practitioners that recognize we need something much more radical to meet the challenges of our times, and the healing and the reparations that are needed. And so really thinking about education as this transformative tool to get us there, and developing approaches and networks of support as well. I think that's something that my work's really taught me, that rather than, we started very much as offering services, and now recognizing much more about building those infrastructures but rooted in the kind of thinking that we're talking about here. So thanks for inviting me here, and I've probably missed a whole bunch of things in that, but
it's great. Thanks, Max. That's really amazing to hear a bit of your journey, some of the highlights. And I think, well, first of all, good to hear of your formative youth hostel experiences, which I also can relate to as a child going to youth hostels. But I just to flag, the Visionary is really inspiring, and it's inspired me. And if people are listening and they're not don't know about the Visionaries, the links in the YouTube synopsis. So do check out the work the Visionaries do, and Max and his team are really incredible. Thank you, Max. I'm going to go back to Emma because the chapter that Emma has written for Wild Service, which this book continues to resonate and inspire with many people. Don't worry if you've not read the chapter, because I'm now going to put Emma on the spot and ask her to tell us a bit. Now, I don't want you to go into all the detail, because we've got a lot more to unpack in this call. Max already mentioned words like transformation, which we can have a think about, and Wild Service, maybe think about those kind of concepts. But what's the premise, Emma? What's your chapter about, for anyone that has not done their homework? Oh, you're muted. You need to press that button.
Thanks, Lewis. Yeah, I had to do some homework myself because it has been a while. Just a quick shout out before I do that. Max and I met on the Bio Leadership Project during COVID, and just a shout out to those guys who are also doing phenomenal work. They are connecting leadership with Earth, and doing and setting up amazing rhizomic networks from there. So shout out to them. So yeah, my chapter is essentially, how can education get humans to care beyond themselves? How can we, and I think I call it in my chapter, sit next to every other organism with no hierarchical relational power? We are the same as we are nature. How can education, where it's at in modernity that divides us from that, get us to that point? It's quite big, right? So anyway, I use at this point, actually, I'd just like to say that this crisis, this meta crisis that we're in, I came across at Schumacher, and one of the guiding lights there was Joanna Macy, who just wanted to pay a quick tribute to her, has just passed away the last few days. And there was a couple of lines I think I put in my chapter that she described this time as the essential adventure of our time, right? For everybody. This is the essential adventure, and we're all adventurers mostly here, towards a life-sustaining civilization. Okay, so, you know, that kind of really, she set me off on this trajectory. So yeah, how my chapter is shaped, and because I'm a creative, I've got a visual shape for it, and this might help other people get into it, and it's shaped around lines, and there is a philosophy of the line, but it's basically kind of divided into the straight line that goes a little bit like this, that is a line that goes upwards, probably diagonal and never ending, and this is modernity, or where we are in our society, and we're being sold this path to self-actualization. And on this pathway, which starts within our education system, we're being told that we're meant to push harder, strive further, achieve goals, get outcomes, push harder, get status, just continue until we hit retirement, which is also a societal construct. So there's this line, and then there's the opposite to this line. It's like the deviant line, and this is the zigzagging line. And this zigzagging line, so it can go like this, it can go backwards. So we've got these two different philosophies. And the zigzagging line, actually, I can borrow from Tim Ingold, who's an anthropologist, and he talks about the difference in these lines. He talks about the straight line being the line of transportation, and the other line being a wayfaring journey line. But that's also probably been borrowed from indigenous ontologies that talk about wayfaring journeys. Reference Tyson Yunker Porter's written a great book on this called Sand Talk, if you're interested in finding out more. So this journey, as opposed to the straight line journey, is not reductionist. It's full of diversity. It celebrates creativity. It's nomadic. It stops and it starts. It pauses and it pulses. It allows complexity. It allows plurality. The important bits are the relationships in between. It's not how you got there and then you've got there and then you've accumulated that, right? It's all relational. So I've based my chapter on these two lines, and I hope that's creating a visual picture. And within that, I explain where education, curriculum, our education sits, and then I talk about outdoor education and where that sits in this framework, because they do merge, they do overlap. One's not better than the other. Outdoor education has also got some dysfunction and feeds also into the straight line, and maybe we'll get onto that. But that's essentially how my chapter is, and it ends with possibility. What is happening? What is doing already? What can we also do to close this divide between humans and nature that are separate? and causing such mental distress, causing global warming, causing everything. Okay.
Great. Thanks. I mean, if you're interested in learning more, read the chapter. Thanks. Well, we're going to follow some of those wiggling lines of that chapter as we go forward in this conversation. Max, maybe I can ask you just to reflect for a moment on what education means to you, because it's not a straightforward word, is it? And I suspect the visionaries and in your own philosophy, you have some of your own challenges to put to that word.
Yeah. So, yeah, what is education? It's a great question, a great word, and not an easy one to answer. Yeah, in a way, I guess I sit more with like why education than what education, but you know, I think the why precedes the what, and the what can take many forms, I guess. But yeah, I guess you know, at the Visionaries, we're a group of practitioners that have different pedagogies and approaches, but all share, I guess, a common vision for a world where education is about nurturing our innate gifts and drawing out the wisdom that we innately carry, and recognizing that young people or the learner is whole already, not some empty vessel to be filled up. And I guess on a kind of narrative level, that's maybe where our current educational paradigm goes quite awry, in that it's a lot about, you know, you write this at length in your chapter, and about, you know, knowledge transmission and a very linear approach to learning. And so what education looks like and what it is changes radically when you approach it from that more reciprocal relational paradigm. So yeah, I guess for me that's about it being incredibly experiential, and recognizing that education is always an environmental and a place-based activity. It's not this kind of theoretical thing that transcends the spaces that we're inhabiting. So if we're learning in a classroom, the relationality of those four walls will be part of our learning experience. And if the narrative we're told is that we need to pass these exams to be an adult, then those exams become part of our identity and our self-worth in a way that is very complex and challenging to unpick, which we obviously see in young people's challenges with school and education in its current presentation. A little anecdote that I thought would kind of be interesting to bring in. So the Visionaries offices has been in a primary school the last few years in East London, and we moved into these offices in the very first day that the school opened. Like a lot of primary schools, they started with the first year and left all the other classrooms empty, so reception would always be the oldest year as things went. So instead of leaving the rest of the building empty, the school decided to fill it with lots of education and education adjacent organisations. And I'll never forget arriving in the first day, and they hadn't even quite finished laying all the concrete and paving slabs outside the school, but there was a silver birch tree in a plastic bag in a concrete bowl in the playground, and eventually got filled in and was just this lone tree in a bag, and the rest of the playground was next to a dual carriageway and all concrete and some car tires for the kids to play with, amongst a few other bits and pieces. But the kind of nature in this urban space was incredibly limited, and lo and behold, this lone tree eventually did die and had to get taken out. But it just got me really it's just a great metaphor for the paradigm of thinking of like, what is education? Education is this thing that happens inside the classrooms. It happens in books, or it in preparation for exams, and not not in relationship to this living being that is outside in the playground, and the tree was neglected. So yeah, I just thought I'd offer that as a little bit of an anecdote. To me, it was quite telling of what is education in its current form.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And yeah, like you say, it's probably the wrong question in a way, or a question that leads to many other questions. And where does education take place? How does it happen? Why even? And I suppose from a Right to Roam campaign point of view, it's one of the questions that's often put to us, or the sort of potential for the critiques is actually one of the big challenges is a lack of education, but then perhaps kind of thinking more critically about what that means in terms of people's experiences is a sort of a good way of unpicking that a bit more. I'm interested in the word because I suppose the chapter has got the heading education. And I'm interested in how you initially responded, like in your gut, to Nick Hayes and John Moses going, "Hey, can you write about education?" Because I imagine that maybe there would have been a bit of a challenge there initially.
How do you mean? What do you mean challenge, Lewis?
Well, I mean, write about education. You talk about experiences. You talk about kind of profound moments in the outdoors, adventure and transformation. Education feels quite a shallow sort of way of defining those experiences, which you very deftly unpack in your chapter. But I imagine initially that must have been a challenge to speak to that kind of the concept of education in the ways that Max has kind of laid out. Did that feel a challenge initially, or were you happy to write to that?
Because I was already there, and because most of my learning and education has come from moments and encounters in the outdoors. So I suppose I can relate back to what curriculum education and mainstream education has been set up for. But I only really looked into that during my time at Schumacher, and was really shocked to understand that, like, back in 1972, the World Bank was even on the panel to suggest what goes in, what doesn't go into the curriculum, right? So I didn't know that. So all of this is like reflections during my late 30s, going into my 40s. And so that was a shock. And, when you do look at, and Max has just touched on that, our education system has come from the 17th and 18th centuries to through the scientific revolution. And it is about optimizing people. It's optimizing people to fulfill roles in a capitalist growth society. And it's really good and effective at doing that. Right. But the problem is at the expense, which Max has also just spoken about, is the word educare, or education, comes from educare, which means to allow for the flourishing of innate gifts. We as humans are individuals because nature is individual. Nature has individual components. But we are not being allowed for that to flourish because we are getting transmitted information to learn and then speak back to pass exams, right? So that's how I understand the difference between our education and the education that I've known, which is out on the land, which is how I relate to the land, how I relate to other people, how I relate to the planet, in moments and encounters, and being held by a brilliant facilitator. Yeah, is that answered your question?
Well, I mean, there are many answers, and there's no correct answer. Don't worry. There'll be no exam script submitted at the end of this. That was great, thanks. I'm going to hand over to you guys for a bit because I think you've got some questions for each other, and then I'll pick it up with a few questions before we go over to any of our audience questions. So I think, Em, shall I hand over to you to ask Max some questions?
Yeah, definitely. So Max, I'm curious to know why you've chosen to centre some of the gifts that you offer on Indigenous learning, and why is that particularly important for our society to move education from where it is?
Why have I chosen to centre my gifts on Indigenous learning and why that's important? So I guess maybe it's important to start with this idea of what is indigeneity. I think it's something that is explored a lot in the circles that I move in, and I'm very grateful that we're exploring this idea of what does it mean to be Indigenous to a place. Of course, there's a lot we need to be mindful of when we think about the global context of what that means. And of course, when we think about the reasons why so many humans are being forcibly removed from their indigenous relationship to land and place, and the histories of separation that has occurred, both on the British Isles, but also all over the world. And so, I think to me, exploring this idea of indigeneity is really important to learning and education, because without the two being in relation, without those two being in relationship, we are perpetuating a separation story of humans and nature and all the other false binaries that we've inherited through our this industrial complex that we live within. And so reclaiming our relationship to the land is a really important part of education, and being supported in our educational experiences to nurture that relationship. Otherwise, education creates the culture we live in, right? So if we're and culture, the culture then designs education. So they're in this cycle, this feedback loop, and at the moment it feels like quite a vicious loop rather than a virtuous loop. And so I guess I'm interested in how cultivating a deeper sense of belonging and expanding our sense of self to include all of the beings and the landscapes and the earth that we walk on, the food that we eat, and just appreciating that we are a being that doesn't end where our skin ends, that we're in dynamic relationship with the places that we exist within. It's just a very different narrative of what education is and what learning and how we approach learning. And so if this kind of separation is one of the, in our belief, and you say in your chapter, one of the core kind of wounds of our time, this our kind of modern thinking has allowed us to stray us from, which actually creates an othering, right? Like I see myself as separate from nature or from it's an othering of nature, it's an othering of other people, and that allows for a whole kind of way of being in relationship that can lead to greater harm and extraction and domination, oppression that doesn't exist if you see the ecosystems you're part of and the people that are around you or in the world as part of you. So yeah, for me, it's about going right back to the kind of the root of it and understanding that, I guess what is a very indigenous perspective, like that I'm only as healthy as the soil around that I eat from. I'm only as healthy as the culture that I'm in. And so it's getting away from that kind of slightly very problematic paradigm of thinking and coming back to a kind of an education rooted in connection and belonging and identity, and all of the more radical approaches that come with that, because I'm aware that we can't. There's a lot that needs to be grappled with. As Donna Haraway says, like, how do we stay with the trouble of that, and how do we learn to really be relinquish some of the privileges of hyper consumer culture that gives us this false sense of belonging and false sense of contentment, that actually perhaps if we were in deeper relationship with place, we might recognize that we can't consume as rapidly as we do, or mindlessly as we do, and treat others in the way that we do. So yeah, maybe that's a bit of a start on that. I don't know, I'm curious to hear if you've both got thoughts on that, the question around belonging and indigeneity as it relates to education.
I'm going to leave it to you guys to have a chat about this. So go ahead, you respond. Pull me in if you want to.
I was interested in you talking about relational difference or othering, which I see as relational difference. And this is what really this whole time is about, isn't it? Because we've got so much polarity, political polarity, fear, and the binaries that have been created, which, human nature and mind, body, and they're all, reduced to something that then gives us fears of difference. And so during this time, in fact, Donna Haraway talks about the word queer, and using queer as a verb to break down and disrupt these binaries by pulling them apart. And so we need to use tools or systems or mechanisms to be able to do this, because we are in modernity. We in the global north are no longer, or have lost, become separate from our own indigeneity. And so we need tools. And as Robin Wall Kimmerer said, that we aren't indigenous, we can't use indigenous ontologies, but we can travel towards them, right? So that's, I don't want to borrow too much, but that, we can't be the same as, or go into the same territory as indigenous tribes that hold or do sit next to their kin right now, but we can travel towards it, is my answer to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I add a little bit to that?
For sure.
There's just something around, how do we travel towards that, I guess, was a question that comes to mind. And in your chapter you talk about this idea of expanding our ecological self, and which comes from Arne Næss and the deep ecology work, and I think the way that we think about education currently in the West is just so far from allowing that kind of receptivity that actually is, in terms of, from my sense, like the things that help us to travel towards a deeper sense of belonging to place and a deeper sense of belonging to people is nurturing that capacity to be receptive and connective, and that involves slowing down, doing less, being more mindful. So many of the things that like our kind of growth and progress addicted culture doesn't allow us to do, particularly when actually accessing those spaces, as there's so many barriers to accessing moments and places that facilitate us to be in that kind of relational inquiry that supports that kind of reclaiming of a kind of a more indigenous relationship to place. And so, obviously why the work around land rights was so important, and ownership, and that's particularly why my work has really moved into really thinking about governance and the systems that then create the relational fabric that we and the spaces that we inhabit, because without going upstream and really thinking about, okay, well, how do we co-participate and co-create these spaces? How do we co-own these spaces? And the design is yeah, we get stuck. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I mean, I can riff off that if that's good with you, Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep going.
So I think that takes us like into what are the imaginaries, how can we reimagine education, and like you said, how can we sit next to our kin? What does that look like? And if we think about it with the view and the optics we have now, it seems really difficult and we can't do that. That's massive, right? But if we look at it through the wayfaring journey lens, which offers transcontextual or multiplicity, which means bringing in different ways of knowing and being, and exchanging those, bringing ideas, not looking through it in one single lens, then that can open up different possibilities. Nora Bateson talks about this, and she has got a project at United World College called Warm Data, and it's a facilitated discussion where you actually don't get to the end. It's all the data that you form, which is the sharing between people, is just kept warm, right? We don't need an outcome from this 2-hour session. But because of that, it's generating new knowledge, new ways of going forwards, right? So at some point it has to be extracted and taken out and worked upon, but it's just like kept warm. And you're like, well, what, it's urgent in this time, but actually, this is about, she calls it slow mud. We keep plugging holes with fast thinking and engineering solutions, right? But it's not getting us out of this mess. So we need to kind of sit in the messy stuff, like you're talking about, Donohan. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm thinking about that. But also, I think it takes you towards what can be done short term and medium term, and that is eco-literacy. Let's start talking and using language about and with around nature. Let's center living systems in our systems. Let's bring in a national world service, which I've spoken about in the book. And I know we're going a little bit towards the end now, Lewis, but let's decolonize education. Let's take out private schools. This might be contentious to remove the power systems. Let's look at other ways of knowing. Let's put our learning in 50% of the outdoor spaces. There's so many different things and grassroots organizations that are doing other things that there is potential. And I can talk about what I'm doing in one of the other questions towards this going forwards. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We're okay for time, by the way. We've got plenty of time. There's a few questions coming in. I'm going to move us on, though. I think we've got amazing context and basis to continue this discussion. You guys are right if I just chuck some questions in there and we can just
go for it. Yeah.
Sure. Max, Helen's saying that there was that they felt a particular quite an unsettling moment was that when you said 30% of secondary pupils were going to fail due to our exam and education system, and that alone means that we've got it wrong. I mean, you also said, I think that that there's a sort of a different way of thinking, which is that actually, like, we're already like full vessels, and we've got lots to offer the world. And I think there's you talked a lot about these different paradigms of education. Do you see practice and things out there which gives you hope that that in some ways we're sort of moving towards something different? And perhaps could you give us some examples, even if it's from your own practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question and reflection, Helen. Yeah, I mean, it's good that we're unsettled by these things, I think, because that we need to listen to that. It's part of what motivates us to do things differently. I mean, I think there's outside of and inside of kind of mainstream education, there's so much good practice happening, and in a way, I guess our work has bridged these two worlds, and they feel like almost, I think I've learned to relate to them quite differently, because the work within the kind of mainstream education system, there's such a game that needs to be played, and that is not going to change overnight. That what innovation looks like and what healthier practice looks like in that is a very different thing to if you're creating these more alternative learning communities and learning settings, and so I almost think they're kind of two different conversations. But I guess for me, the things that really inspire me is where there's more participation in the creation of the learning experience from the learner. So there's actually the learner is having a lot more agency in their own learning journey. So rather than being told, okay, you can pick between 8 subjects or 4 subjects or whatever point their journey at that, it's actually the learning is much more centered around their own curiosities. And because all of life is connected to all of life, my belief is that we would, if you follow your curiosities, you find yourself finding connections to everything, and suddenly you're learning about, first of all, you might explore technology, that then you realize that's completely connected to all of the global systems that we've created, of where our technology comes from, and the environments and the minerals and the people that are the labor that goes into all of that. And so there's endless possibilities. And and it's like really big shout out to people like Rowan Salim and Artemis and others who are part of the Freedom to Learn Forum and the Freedom to Learn Network. There's so many great networks of practitioners that are kind of exploring, okay, well, actually, what do these different learning experiences look like? And then within the mainstream, there are people like the Black Mountains College, obviously Schumacher College down in Devon, that are going through an interesting journey at the moment. But lots of land-based projects that are really thinking about how the learning is more centered around the land and the place than just the humans that inhabit it. I'm part of a collective that we're setting up trying to set up this thing called the Life-Centered Learning Alliance, which is the idea is for it to be a very participatory, intergenerational alliance of community groups, but also bridging this kind of mainstream and community-based learning, to think about what would learning look like if we put life at the center, not just human life, but all life, and design from that basis. And we've, as a group, the last 5 months gone through a bit of a journey and came up with 12 draft design principles. What does life-centered learning look and feel like in it? And it's things like consent is at the core of the design, the ecological thinking, kind of decolonial thinking, those kinds of things. So maybe also we can share some of where our learning's at, but it's meant to be a living, not meant to be a kind of like we've got the answer. More, these are some living principles that we find helpful to explore and guide us in our continued learning and unfolding.
Thank you, Max. That's really great. I was just was really inspiring hearing some of those examples. I'll give you a moment to kind of, if you've got anything you want to throw in there. I was just sort of really struck by this kind of feeling of like sometimes dealing with the systems that feel oppressive can feel like you're in the. I used to live in North Wales where there was quite often in the valleys you just wouldn't get the sunlight into the valleys in the middle of winter, and I've felt like you've lit some beacons on the hilltops that we can kind of look to. So in the absence of sunlight, when you're dealing with those kind of really oppressive systems, and thanks, Max. Just quickly, do you want to throw anything else in there to give us some kind of beacons to look to on the hills?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is just look at what I call a periphery pedagogy, which is outdoor education. And I talk about in the book that for sure it's part of it, and very cynically, it is also optimizing people for optimizing themselves to go back into society, to survive in society. So you kind of go out from society, go into the outdoors, you really rehabilitate yourself, you kind of push yourself, strive yourself, get better, get more resilient to survive back in society, right? So there's that really toxic part of it that is still about pushing and striving and working toward, with challenge and adversity. But there's beautiful moments and beautiful parts that we need to take and put into all educative systems, and mostly it's around the dynamism. So let's take the premise of the dynamic system and put it in to our mainstream systems, but also how that's held, how dynamism is held by a facilitator that has got very complex task of holding an individual with care and responsibility, right? And that is also a good facilitator allows for those innate gifts to come out if they're not pushing hard to get to the summit, right? So it's how can we take the care and the complexity that an outdoor facilitator has and give it to other educators everywhere else. And that kind of means what Max has been saying is working with emergent themes and inquiries and going from there, zigzagging to, so it then becomes an interest, or bringing in, I see educators as being holders of many different roles. So like maybe a bit of geology, geography, biology, maybe that can happen as well. So I think we need to think about how facilitators become rewilded. Also, that journey, and maybe that goes to camping, but the journey from A to B, that kind of pulse to pause, that nomadism of not necessarily on an outcome journey of getting to the end, but pulsing and pausing and picking up and immersing yourself and being with in place and space. Also kind of taking that metaphor of nomadism into our mainstream schools. What can we learn for outdoor education, and how can outdoor education move beyond itself at the moment?
Thank you. There we are, a few more beacons lit on those hills. Thank you both for that. I think it's so lovely to hear about some of the inspiring things that I know that you're both doing in your work, but also that are happening globally and are kind of like grappling with this sort of big challenge. There's been a really lovely set of comments from Rebecca in the chat. I'm just going to summarize, but I think it's a really nice provocation to think about. They say that Rebecca grew up knowing land, rivers, plants, places, knowing that they were all alive and sentient. They were spirits like us, and then that was just normal. And it was experiences that taught them that. And that point of view has remained with Rebecca. It's not seen very often in our culture, and in fact it's seen as something which is the project is to kind of bring it out and to bring it to emerge. There's a suggestion here that maybe there are more people, many people feel this way, but it's a sort of secret that people live with, and that's, I think, a really lovely provocation just to reflect on. Certainly as a father of a 7-year-old, I see that kind of innate relation with the world as being exactly that, exactly as Rebecca has put. I know that my daughter would relate to that, and I love kind of getting that sort of secondhand from her. But I do wonder, you know, is this a secret that's out there that actually none of us are willing to speak about, because maybe it's just not a common part of our kind of broader culture?
That's a beautiful reflection. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I guess that, you know, it makes me think about how spirituality and soulfulness has been, by design, separated from our mainstream education systems, and actually sounds like the experiences that Rebecca's speaking of there is having a regular invitation into being in awareness of the beings that we're around in the world, and experiencing life alongside that more animist view of the world, which, yeah, as you said about your 7-year-old, like, kids go into education with a very animist view of the world. Every creature is in conversation with them, and all beings, plant, mineral, and more sentient, are like they're in conversation, and I think we're born with a capacity to listen and be in dialogue and relationship in that kind of way. And actually, maybe we're not training those muscles, or listening muscles, quite as much as we need to be. But I think what gives me hope is that, you know, it actually doesn't take all that much to really rekindle that way of perceiving, and that way of viewing ourselves. And actually, you know, I think this is why I'm really drawn to rites of passage work, particularly nature-based rites of passage, where we really immerse ourselves in nature in ways that invite us to go and have a conversation with the tree, like listen to what the beetle has to say to you, listen to what, you know, really. And maybe it's actually the language is different as well, right? It's different types of knowledge. So learning to also trust intuitive knowledge and emotional knowledge, which are also marginalized in our kind of mainstream understanding of what kinds of intelligence are prioritized. Yeah, I mean, I know certainly as a man growing up in this world, kind of being in touch with my emotions is something that definitely got drilled out of me as a teenage boy in an all boys school, and it's been a lifetime journey of rekindling that intimacy with that kind of intelligence.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Do you want to add anything to that? I'm interested in how this kind of like codes onto kind of doing adventure stuff as well. Like, is this Max talked about hedonism earlier on, and the kind of like, you know, that sort of pursuit of the adrenaline feels quite far from the sort of the sort of what Rebecca was talking about. But I mean, is it always that far? There are plenty of mountain spirits out there, right?
There are, but if you haven't been dialed into them when you had the opportunity when you were young, I think it's quite hard to find them when you're older, especially where there's quite a lot of land injustice and access. Just to go back to mainstream ed, I know that Forest School, from what I've been told, I've never been in it, but is amazing for encouraging this. I don't, you know, you guys probably know more than me, but from what I've been told, but that stops at 7. From 7 to 18, there's barely anything. You know, in Wales last year, they were trying to lobby to have just every child has 1 week of education in their school lifetime, and that didn't go through, right? So that's how poorly curriculum education is preparing people to go into the outdoors, right? So that's more wilder journeys. So there's a disconnect from 7 to when you might connect again, right? When is that? Do you feel a calling to do it? And a lot of people, I suppose, that have come on expeditions or challenges or journeys with me have got to a point in their life, they're like, something's wrong. Oh my God, I need to change. And they kind of come on these to put themselves right. And then that's the opportunity a facilitator has then, if they have the tools, to introduce them again to more spiritual or more connected ways of being with nature, right? So but the primary narrative, which is what you were touching on, Lewis, is of the outdoors, is a journey, is challenge, is adversity. It isn't being with, it isn't staying and sitting and watching for eternity. It's still moving through to achieve, all right? So it's very challenge based. And that's Duke of Edinburgh as well. So yeah, that narrative needs to be changed. So there are other, you know, in the outdoor field is actually quite large, but there's a minority of practices and people that are doing more beautiful soul work, and that also needs to be brought in to an outdoor educator's curriculum, say. Yeah, that's what I think.
Great, thank you. Yeah, great call to action there for any outdoor facilitators. And I'm sure I imagine there's just such a range of practice out there as well, and such a range of seeing these things, and you know, beyond the Western as well. And I think there's a lot of really incredible practice which blends the kind of you know, I suppose what we would typically call adventure education with something maybe more heartfelt. I'm going to bring the conversation sort of into discussion with some of the challenges of the Right to Roam campaign for a moment. This is a question from Amy. So the lack of adequate public education around how to be in nature is often cited as a reason that the public cannot be trusted with wider access. But do we actually need to unlearn first, she asks, unlearn our dependence on higher authorities, custodians or systems to look after land in order to relearn responsibility as individuals? So a question about unlearning in a conversation about education. Max, I can see you smiling. You've got something to say on this.
Again, you just made me think of a moment. So where I'm based at the moment is hopefully going to be a beacon in this world that we're talking about is a new project I'm setting up with my partner, a group of facilitators called and practitioners called the Beaches, which is going to be a social justice hub in the Peak District, all around environmental stewardship and participatory healing, and can bring a space for community organising, and very much about unlearning. Like how can we use a space like this to unlearn some of what we've learned from the world? And it actually just made me think of a moment where some teenagers were trespassing on the land to have a fire, and my partner was taking the wheelbarrow down to do some gardening and saw them, and their learned behaviour was to run off. Well, one of them did at least, and then I guess like our learned behaviour would have been to be like, oh, why you're somewhere where you shouldn't be. Like we weren't engaged and had a conversation with them, and very much invited them into an exploration of how to be. You know, they obviously wanted to be in that place because there's not, in their words, not loads of opportunities or spaces where they can just be freely, have access to kind of youth spaces that they can just be youth, and actually it felt like they were really hungry to explore and participate in something, and I think, yeah, in that encounter was, I think, both parties went through a bit of a kind of supported our unlearning of some learned behavior, like maybe kind of expectations of what is and isn't permissible, and yeah, and I just think there's such an important it's a bit more about the kind of the encounter isn't one where there's a power dynamic or a right and a wrong as such. It's more just surrendering to the kind of to the relationship and to what wants to emerge from that, and yeah, so I think I really appreciate this idea of unlearning, because it forces us to really challenge ourselves to be aware of what are some assumptions that we're operating from, and what are some learned behaviors that are so learned that we just take them as gospel without even kind of questioning them. And yeah, I think these times are calling us to do that level of inquiry.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And it's about mindset shift as well. I guess this is about kind of trying to untangle those knots and to create something different. Have you got any quick reflections on that? Does this idea of unlearning resonate with you as well?
Very much. I suppose that's the practices that I've been working towards and what I've been doing with myself, and the competitive, performative, part of modernity that I've been trying to unlearn since I learned about it. So, but I just want to turn to, I suppose that's where when we're talking about a change of mindset and a change of consciousness, which is where we can come back to where service comes in, and service being the foundation stone for belonging. So if we were to bring service more into the mainstream psyche as a transformational mindset rather than a transactional mindset, which is what it's at now, it's from taking it from something that we want to have to we want to be with. So bringing service into all different places, and I've kind of made a provocation at the end of my chapter to create, and I'm probably going to not fulfill, but pursue this in inquiry, is to create something called a national world service, which is to plug that into the space where it's missing into school from the age of 7, where there is a return to the land, where there is a return to the local landscapes, because obviously there is a big problem that we see nature out there in those national parks when actually it's all the way around us. So, but it's to work with the local stewards of the land. What that looks like, I'm not sure right now, but it's a schema, I suppose, that helps us return, that has the mindset of a head, heart and hands that we can be with and in the land, that will hopefully give us that mindset going outwards, and that respect and reverence, for the land when we exit mainstream education. That's the idea.
It's a great idea. Sign me up. Yeah, nice one. Great. Well, I'm going to start to bring it to a close, but I have got another question for you. And this is about, I mean, at the end of the day, joy, love for place, enjoyment, and creativity are kind of really important factors here. I believe. I mean, I think it's really great to find the fun in this, and I wonder, for you guys, what is the most fun that you've had in nature, and what did you learn from it, if it is appropriate to tell us? And I'll leave it up to you to determine what's appropriate for 7:15 at night. We don't have a strict watershed at Right to Roam, so just go for it.
I can share that in preparation for this, I went to the my church graveyard with my headphones in and listened to the Ezra Collective whilst dancing around the graveyard around a World Service tree. That was quite fun.
Like a sort of a personal wassailing of the World Service.
That's right. Yeah. And I also found kind of opposite it, which I hadn't seen before, a true service tree. There's the true service and the World Service together in a graveyard. But I was with my headphones just pulling some moves off around the tree. And that was quite fun and lovely. That was getting body. That was out of mind into body.
Nice. Thanks. That's a great image. Actually, that's gonna stay with me. And Max, what about you? Give us some something enjoyable, something fun that you've had in nature. What did you get from that?
Wow, I mean, I feel so fortunate to have lots of different things coming up. I mean, funny enough, I was also thinking about a moment of dancing naked on top of a mountain. So there's maybe something in the music and the kind of the liberatory aspects of being wild in nature. And yeah, I mean, wild swimming, just so many moments of just being in kind of expansive lakes and oceans and kind of feeling the smallness of my little human body in the vast expanse of the water. And yeah, I mean, for me, like fell running as well, like just feeling like being light on my feet and running through the mountains and just having that kind of yeah, just the freedom that kind of exploring that brings. And I guess also, like, you know, that having trained in a lot of different mountain awarenesses and how to be safe in those environments, the confidence and the sense of being able to kind of meet edges in those environments and bring others into those edges in transformative ways is always deeply fun and yeah, enjoyable. And yeah, I mean, the list goes on really, but
thank you. Thanks, Max. I can see that you've got something else that you might want to add in. Would you like the final word before we draw things to a close?
There's no more questions, or is this your is this
give us your last word and then
oh no, I don't last word, but I think it's probably important to say that I just wanted to say one of the things that I've been working on, which is the thing that I feel is missing, and the element that will close polarities of difference and help us not other than humans, is empathy and that quality. And I'm doing a PhD at the moment that is looking at how we elicit empathy. And so I just wanted to say there is work that's happening, and there is work this is going to be for accessible anywhere, not just for outdoor educators. And empathy is the key term in how we're trying to relate. And it's asking the questions, how do we relate to those who don't talk back, right? And it looks at practices like what Max was saying, animism, it looks at dance, it looks at all different ways of knowing, embodied knowing. And I think that's where it needs to be going, coming from out of the head, unlearning the head into the body and being in the body. So empathy for me is the key in going forwards for any relationship, really. Wanted to add that. Thank you, Lewis.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, yeah, thanks. It's a really important point, and yeah, a true cornerstone of any good education system or approach, I think. But thank you so much, both of you. Your hilltop beacons have warmed my sense of possibility as to what education can become, and the mental image of you dancing naked on mountaintops and around wild service trees is gladdens my heart. So I really appreciate everything that you've brought to this evening and your time and of course the chapter. So thank you for making this such a rich session. And both details of both Max and Em's details are in the bio for the in the description for the YouTube. So do reach out to them if you've got any things that you'd like to follow up on. And of course, if you haven't done already, read the book and do sign up to the Right to Roam mailing list and stay tuned for more things. A few of us taking a break over the summer and we'll be back in the autumn. But thanks everybody who's joined tonight as well and who might be watching this later on as well. Great. Let's go outside.
Thanks for holding, Lewis. Thank you, Max.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you. And hope to see you in the real world at some point soon.
That would be lovely.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye bye. Just let this.